The prairie stretched wide, endless, a quilt of gold and green trembling beneath the first fingers of morning light. Dust swirled in soft eddies, catching the sun like tiny sparks, and somewhere beyond the horizon, the wind whispered over the grass, telling stories only the land could remember. She moved through that wind, each step measured, each motion deliberate. A log, rough and heavy from the forest, pressed against her shoulder as though it carried a weight beyond its own. One foot in front of the other, she dragged it across the clearing, her boots leaving prints in the soft, dew-kissed soil. She was tall for her age, 35, with arms that carried the lean strength of labor. Her hands were calloused, yet there was a softness in the curve of her fingers, the way she paused sometimes to brush away a splinter or wipe sweat from her brow. Her hair, a tumble of dark waves, clung to her face, streaked with dust and sun. She hummed a melody, low and haunting, a tune she must have learned in childhood, a song that rose and fell like the wind over the plains. It was a sound that seemed to reach the very heart of the prairie, threading itself through the leaves of cottonwood and the drift of tumbleweeds. From a distance, leaning against the rail of his old fence, the cowboy watched. He was 48, broad-shouldered, with the quiet weight of loss pressing down on him. Widowed for nearly a decade, he carried the echo of children's laughter that no longer filled his cabin, a hollow ache that never left his chest. He had not expected to see someone who built a life with such care, who shaped her world one log at a time. And yet here she was, radiant in her solitude, unbent by the hard hand of the land. He shifted his weight, knuckles whitening as he gripped the fence. The air smelled of pine and dry earth, of early frost yet to come. He had come here for work once, years ago, chasing cattle across the plains, and now he stayed to watch her, uncertain why his heart drew him near. Perhaps it was the way she moved, deliberate, unhurried, as though every task were a prayer. Perhaps it was the quiet determination that reminded him of what he had lost, or what he had once hoped to find. She did not see him, though he stayed in the shadow of the ridge. She paused beside a half-constructed cabin, laid a hand on a log, feeling the grain like the pulse of her own persistence. The wood was heavy, coarse, and yet in her grasp, it became something tender. She had chosen this place not because it was easy, but because it was hers to claim. Every log she stacked, every nail she drove, was a line in a story only she could write. Nearby, a wandering trader rode slowly across the prairie, a figure of dust and motion, nodding once in acknowledgement before moving on. The woman glanced up from her work, noting the small gestures, the way the world paid attention if you were patient enough to notice. And though the cowboy remained silent, unseen, he too had begun to participate in her story, like a shadow that did not intrude but lingered, waiting for the moment it could be more. That it was not only labor that filled her days. Small rituals threaded through the routine, each one a stitch in the tapestry of her new life. She set stones carefully along the edge of a nascent garden, planting seeds she hoped would bloom, not knowing if she would live to see their flowers. She built a small bird perch from spare branches, humming as a songbird landed and tilted its head at her. Every detail mattered. Every choice was an affirmation that she existed fully and fiercely in a world that had often tried to tell her otherwise. The cowboy watched her pause, brush a hand across the log, then lift it again with unerring precision. In his chest, memories stirred like embers long thought dead. He remembered his own home, long abandoned to silence, the laughter of children that had faded into echoes. He remembered nights spent alone, staring at the stars, wishing for a life that seemed impossible. And here she was, shaping hers from nothing, a testament to courage he had thought lost to him. As she moved to adjust a log, a small gesture caught his eye. A flask, left at the edge of the clearing, water still shimmering inside. He had carried it down that morning, placing it where she would find it, though he had not dared to approach. She saw it, curiosity flickering in her eyes, and paused, lifting it in her hand, weighing the gift of kindness without words. She sipped, then set it carefully beside the log, as if returning gratitude to the wind itself. The prairie held its breath. Dust settled. Sunlight struck the logs, warming them until they seemed alive. And in that quiet moment, As the wind danced through the tall grasses, something unspoken began to grow, an awareness of another heart nearby, a presence that could be trusted, not yet a story, but the beginning of one. Every log she laid, every mark of effort on her face, became a stanza in the poem of her life. And from the ridge, the widower watched, learning again what it meant to hope, to witness courage, and to feel, quietly, the stirrings of a longing that had been dormant too long. Dusk draped the prairie in hues of rose and violet, softening the edges of the land until the horizon seemed to melt into the sky. She sat on the rough-hewn steps of her half-built cabin, tracing the grain of a plank as though it held the shape of the world. Her hands were streaked with sawdust and sweat, but her eyes shone with quiet satisfaction. The sun lingered on the tips of the logs, gilding them, and the wind, ever faithful, carried the faint scent of pine and smoke, brushing her hair across her cheeks like a gentle reminder that she was not alone. Across the clearing, the cowboy lingered, leaning against his fence post, silhouette etched against the twilight. 48 years had worn him like a well-loved saddle, roughened, weathered, but still capable of bearing weight. He kept his distance, knowing the space between them was as much about respect as caution. Yet he could not tear his gaze from her. There was something in the way she breathed life into every log, every nail, every small effort of her day, that spoke to a part of him long dormant, a part that remembered warmth, laughter, and the faint echo of family. She noticed him then, not directly, but as one notices the shift of shadows. Their eyes met briefly, and she offered a small nod, almost imperceptible, before returning to her work. That single acknowledgement carried a weight neither of them had yet named. She understood, in the quiet of her heart, that some souls could be trusted without words, that the presence of another, steady and patient, could feel like home even before it had been claimed. Evenings settled slowly in the prairie. Fireflies began to the fields like pinpricks of distant stars. The cowboy would leave small signs of attention, a can of clean water, a bundle of firewood, or a carefully mended fence rail. Each gesture spoke of care without intrusion. And she, noticing these small tokens, allowed herself a rare smile, her lips brushing a laugh she had almost forgotten she possessed. There was no rush, no urgency, only a gradual recognition that the world could hold kindness as readily as it did hardship. The wandering trader passed occasionally, offering half-forgotten stories from towns and trails, teasing lightly at their silent exchanges. A young boy from the settlement lingered near the edges of the clearing, curious, eyes wide, daring not to intrude, but unable to resist the quiet fascination of watching two people learn the rhythms of each other. His presence added a subtle warmth, a sense that life and connection were not only possible, but unfolding before him in real time. That night, she would light a small lantern, setting it on the cabin's threshold, the glow spilling across the snow-dusted logs. He would watch from a distance, noticing the tilt of her head, the way she hummed a different song each night, and the subtle rhythm of her breathing that matched the wind's own pulse. Sometimes she left bread or dried fruit near the edge of the clearing, a silent offering, and he accepted it with a nod, knowing that gratitude could be quiet and still powerful. They began to share small routines. He would occasionally offer her news of the town beyond the prairie, stories of weather, livestock, or passing travelers. She would respond with observations of the land, where the snow might drift, which trees offered the best shade, which streams ran clear and true. In these exchanges, a fragile trust grew, like tiny shoots breaking through winter soil. Neither sought to impress or dominate. Both simply existed alongside one another, learning the language of patience and quiet understanding. And yet, beneath the simplicity of these gestures, a tension lingered. The cowboy carried the weight of loss, the memory of children who would never return. He feared opening too fully, even to someone who seemed so steadfast and alive. She, too, bore scars of solitude, the memory of dreams delayed, of trust withheld, and then shattered by life's harsh turns. And still, they edged closer, drawn not by passion or desperation, but by the shared recognition that two people, each carrying their own burdens, could find solace in the presence of the other. One evening, the wind shifted, carrying with it the scent of distant rain and the promise of storms yet to come. She paused mid-task, looking to the horizon, and he instinctively stepped closer, though still a respectful distance away. Their eyes met again, longer this time, and the world seemed to narrow to that fragile, suspended connection. No words were needed. A soft understanding passed between them. She was not alone. He was not alone. And for the first time in years, the prairie itself seemed to hold its breath, witnessing the quiet birth of something neither of them could yet name, but both instinctively recognized. The young boy watched from afar, a small witness to something larger than himself. He could feel the warmth in the gestures, the honesty in the glances, and the slow unfolding of trust that neither distance nor silence could diminish. The wandering trader, riding past for the last time that week, tipped his hat knowingly, as though even he could sense that a story of life and care was quietly knitting itself together in the twilight. By nightfall, the cabin stood half-finished, logs stacked like careful promises. Lantern light danced along the rough edges, casting long shadows that seemed to hold their own quiet stories. The woman, weary but unbowed, leaned against a post and breathed in the chill air, feeling it mingle with the warmth of the day's labors. The cowboy, still at the edge of the clearing, allowed himself a rare sigh, a soft acknowledgement of hope, fragile as it was. It was in these small, unspoken moments, the shared glance, the silent offering, the gentle attention, that something deeper began to stir. Neither rushed, neither forced the bond. Like the prairie itself, wide and patient, they learned the rhythm of presence, the language of quiet understanding. And in the space between logs and wind, between footsteps and shadows, a fragile connection took root, one that promised the slow, steady bloom of companionship and perhaps, in time, of love. Winter's first breath had begun to settle across the prairie, softening the sharp edges of the land with a dusting of snow. The cabin, once a skeleton of logs and nails, now stood proud, warm smoke curling from its small chimney, twisting into the sky like a quiet celebration. She worked steadily, finishing the last pieces of the roof, hammering each nail with a rhythm born of patience and intention. The scent of pine mingled with the crisp air, a perfume of beginnings, of effort rewarded, of life built one careful step at a time. But he approached at a distance first, carrying a bundle of firewood. But this time he drew closer, letting his presence be seen. 48 years of solitude had taught him caution, yet something in the steady lines of her back, in the way her shoulders held the weight of the day, told him that his presence would not intrude. She looked up from a log, eyes narrowing in curiosity, then softening in recognition. A nod, subtle, but enough to speak volumes. That single gesture bridged the quiet distance that had always lingered between them. Evenings were their own kind of communion. Lanterns glowed along the porch as she stirred a pot of stew, the aroma drifting into the cold night. He would offer small stories from his travels, tales of towns and rivers, of cattle drives and forgotten roads, always careful to leave the space for her voice. She responded in kind, recounting the details of the land, the way snow might drift across the roof, the sound of owls in the evening, the simple lessons she had learned from working with her own hands. Each story, each shared observation, became a thread weaving their lives together. They shared meals without ceremony, plates passed quietly, smiles exchanged over the rim of a cup. There were no grand gestures, no rush to reveal hearts long guarded. Instead, there were small, deliberate touches, a hand brushing against another in passing, the offering of a blanket when the night turned colder, the careful placement of a log so that the fire would burn longer. Each act, simple though it seemed, carried a weight neither had expected to find. That a storm came without warning one evening, wind whipping the tall grasses into frantic motion, snow beginning to drift against the cabin walls. She moved quickly, securing shutters and checking the foundation, her hands steady despite the biting cold. He appeared at the edge of the clearing, boots crunching in the fresh snow, and together they worked, silent but in perfect accord. His hands were steady where hers were nimble, his strength where hers was precise. The storm raged around them, but within the walls of the cabin, and within the careful attention they paid each other, there was a warmth that no wind could touch. That it was in these moments that the first hints of love began to crystallize. not a burning, sudden desire, but a quiet acknowledgement of trust and reliance. She began to notice the depth in his gaze, the gentleness behind his rugged exterior, the way he observed without judgment, offering care without expectation. He, in turn, noticed the resilience in her movements, the patience in her labor, the softness she allowed only in moments of solitude or quiet intimacy. Together, they learned that love could emerge not from dramatic declarations, but from sustained attention, from the patience to witness and honor another's life. The cabin itself became a mirror of their connection. Logs carefully stacked, chinks filled with care, windows positioned to catch the morning light and evening glow. It was a place of safety, of creation, of the smallest details speaking the loudest truths. She had built a home, but it was not merely wood and stone. It was a sanctuary where two hearts, hesitant but open, could begin to intertwine. The young boy from the nearby settlement began visiting more often, curiosity turning into tentative participation. He helped carry small logs, ran errands, and listened with wide eyes to the stories they shared around the fire. Each visit, each small smile, reinforced the sense that a family could form not just from blood, but from care, attention, and the deliberate act of being present. The wandering trader, passing one last time before heading into distant hills, tipped his hat with a knowing smile. He had seen countless souls come and go, and even he could sense that something rare and enduring was unfolding here. A life slowly knit together by patience, kindness, and quiet love. By night, the cabin glowed warmly against the pale winter sky. Inside, they shared stories that had been carried in the heart for years. Memories of lost children, of dreams deferred, of solitude endured. And in sharing, they discovered something remarkable, that sorrow and hope could coexist, that past pain need not dictate the future, that hearts long broken could learn to beat in tandem again. One night, after a particularly long day of work and laughter and shared meals, she paused, leaning against the porch post, watching the firelight flicker against his face. For the first time, she let herself see not just a companion, but a man capable of steady love, a man who could protect and nurture, who could be the foundation she had longed for as she built her own life. He, in turn, saw not just a woman resilient against the world, but a soul tender and strong, brave in ways the land itself seemed to recognize. And so, as snow fell softly on the prairie, covering the earth in quiet white, their connection deepened. It was not hurried, it was not forced. It grew in the steady rhythm of labor, in small gestures of care, in stories shared across the warmth of a fire. The cabin, nearing completion, stood as testament to what patience and attention could build, not just walls and a roof, but trust, hope, and the first delicate shoots of love. In the heart of that prairie, amidst logs and snow and whispered winds, they discovered that life could be gentle, even after loss. That love could grow slowly, like the first shoots through winter snow, and that family could be forged not only through chance, but through intention, care, and the courage to remain present for another's soul. The prairie wore a blanket of snow, soft and undisturbed, each flake catching the early light and scattering it like a quiet celebration. The cabin, now fully built, stood solid and warm, smoke curling lazily from the chimney into the pale winter sky. Logs stacked carefully, windows framed with care, and the faint glow of lantern lights spilling onto the snow all spoke of a life carved from patience, labor, and quiet devotion. She stepped outside, the crisp air pressing against her cheeks still flushed from the day's work. He followed, carrying a small bundle, a gift he had found in the town beyond the hills, a hand-carved toy for the young boy who had become a quiet witness, and now a part of this emerging family. Their eyes met, and in that glance, years of solitude and caution fell away, leaving only the warmth of understanding and trust. Together, they surveyed the land, the fields that had once seemed so vast and empty now alive with possibility. Snow lay thick upon the prairie, but the fire in their hearts made the cold inconsequential. He stood beside her, hand brushing lightly against hers, careful, respectful, not needing words to convey the depth of feeling that had grown between them. She leaned into his presence, finding in it a steadiness she had not dared hope for, a shelter not just from the wind, but from the lingering shadows of loss. Inside the cabin, the young boy clutched his small gift, eyes wide with delight. Laughter echoed off the logs, a sound that had been absent for far too long in this quiet corner of the world. The woman watched him, her heart swelling with an unfamiliar fullness, and he caught her gaze, his own eyes soft, revealing a tenderness long kept private. The walls they had built were more than shelter. They were a home, a crucible for the beginnings of a life lived together, with patience, respect, and care. A hush settled over the prairie as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows and igniting the sky with colors that mirrored the quiet intensity of their connection. Side by side, they prepared for the evening, setting the fire, arranging simple meals, tending to the small details that made life feel sacred. Each gesture, each careful attention, spoke of love not as a grand declaration, but as a sustained act of presence, a commitment to nurture and protect. The storm that had once threatened them now seemed distant, a reminder of past challenges overcome. They had weathered wind and cold, and in doing so, discovered the resilience of their hearts. The prairie, wide and patient, bore witness to their story. A woman who had built her life log by log, a man who had learned to hope again, and a child who had found the warmth of belonging. As night settled fully, the stars blanketed the sky, tiny points of light mirrored in the snow below. They stepped outside one final time, hand in hand, feeling the stillness around them, the hum of life beneath the silence. The cabin glowed behind them, a beacon of what patience, courage, and mutual respect could create. And in that moment, the prairie itself seemed to acknowledge their triumph. The quiet joy of love found slowly, carefully, and deeply. He knelt briefly to brush snow from the boy's coat, lifting him into a warm embrace. She watched, heart swelling, and stepped closer, resting her head lightly against his shoulder. In that simple alignment of bodies and hearts, the story reached its emotional apex. Not in words, not in dramatic gestures, but in the unspoken acknowledgement that together, they had built something enduring. The young boy laughed, bright and clear, a sound that threaded through the cabin and the land beyond, and in that laugh, the past shadows lost their weight. The woman smiled, tracing the lines of his small hands, and the cowboy caught her gaze, understanding without speaking that this was the family they had longed for. Patiently forged from solitude and hope, they lingered outside, the firelight spilling onto snow and logs, the prairie breathing around them. And in that hush, they felt a truth that had been hidden beneath years of loss. That love, steady and kind, could transform life's harshest landscapes, that patience and presence could create bonds stronger than fear, and that the heart, when given time to heal and to trust, could bloom in the coldest winter. The wandering trader's distant whistle echoed faintly over the plains, a reminder of journeys continued, of the world beyond. Yet here, in this cabin, this prairie, this small family life had found a perfect pause. They had built more than a home. They had built a life, a family, and a space where hearts could rest and grow. And as they stood together, snow falling softly around them, she whispered to the wind, as if sharing a secret with the world, that courage, kindness, and patience could create beauty from solitude. That love, when nurtured slowly, could heal, and that the prairie, wide and forgiving, could hold dreams, hopes, and hearts long weary, ready at last to flourish. The cabin glowed behind them. The stars above bore witness, and in the quiet, the cowboy and the woman, joined now, alongside the small boy who had become their family, felt the simple, profound joy of belonging, of home, and of love quietly, unwaveringly fulfilled.